Before we begin this incredible Viking tale, if you're enjoying these emotional stories of courage and loyalty, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another adventure. Also, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if you've ever witnessed an act of unexpected loyalty in your own city, whether from an animal or a person. Your stories inspire us to keep bringing you these powerful narratives. Now let's journey back to the age of Vikings. The autumn winds swept across the Norwegian coastline with a bitter chill that penetrated even the thickest wool. The year was 892, and the settlement of Hrafnvik sat nestled between towering cliffs and the restless sea. Smoke rose from longhouses as families prepared their evening meals, the scent of salted fish and hearth fires mingling in the crisp air. Torsten Eriksson stood at the edge of the village, his weathered hands gripping the handle of his axe as he surveyed the darkening tree line. At 32 winters, he'd seen enough of life to know when something felt wrong. The forest seemed too quiet tonight, as if the creatures within held their breath in anticipation of some unseen danger. "You worry too much, brother," called a voice from behind. Torsten turned to see his younger cousin Leif approaching with an easy smile. "The harvest is good, the ships are secure, and winter preparations are nearly complete. What troubles you?" Torsten shook his head slowly, his grey eyes never leaving the shadows between the trees. "I cannot say. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps it is the restlessness that comes before the first snow." Leif clapped him on the shoulder. "Come. Your wife, Ingrid, has prepared a fine stew. The children ask for their father. Leave your watchfulness for tomorrow." But Torsten could not shake the feeling. As the two men walked back toward the warmth of the village, a sound reached his ears, faint, almost imperceptible beneath the wind. It was a whimper, low and pained, coming from somewhere in the forest. "Did you hear that?" Torsten stopped abruptly. Leif frowned, tilting his head. "Hear what? The wind plays tricks, cousin. You've been standing guard too long." The sound came again, clearer this time. Without another word, Torsten turned and strode toward the forest edge, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Leif cursed under his breath and followed, knowing better than to argue when his cousin wore that expression of grim determination. They moved between the ancient pines, their boots crunching on fallen needles and frost-hardened ground. The light was fading fast, painting the world in shades of grey and deep blue. Then Torsten saw it, a shape lying in a small clearing, partially hidden by a fallen log. "Stay back," Torsten warned, approaching cautiously. It was a wolf, and by the size of it, a male. The creature's dark grey fur was matted with dried mud and something darker, dried blood. One of its hind legs lay at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. A crude snare made of rope and metal still clung to the injured limb, the work of trappers from a neighboring settlement who cared nothing for the suffering they caused. The wolf's amber eyes fixed on Torsten as he drew near. There was no aggression in that gaze, only pain and exhaustion. The animal had likely been caught for days, struggling against the trap until its strength gave out. "It's just a wolf," Leif said quietly. "Leave it. Nature will take its course." But Torsten knelt slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "No beast deserves to suffer like this," he murmured, "not even a predator." The wolf watched him, ears flattened against its skull, but made no move to attack. Perhaps it understood, in whatever way animals understand such things, that this human meant no additional harm. Or perhaps it was simply too weak to fight anymore. "Hand me your water skin," Torsten said. "You cannot be serious." "Now, Leif." With obvious reluctance, Leif unslung the leather container and passed it forward. Torsten poured water into his cupped palm and held it near the wolf's muzzle. After a moment's hesitation, the animal's pink tongue lapped desperately at the offering. It drank 3 more palmfuls before Torsten pulled back. "We need to remove the snare," Torsten said, examining the trap. The metal had cut deep into flesh and bone. "This will hurt the creature, but leaving it will mean certain death." "And freeing it might mean our deaths," Leif countered. "You've lost your mind, cousin. This is a wild animal." "Then wait by the trees if you're afraid. I won't abandon a living thing to such misery." Torsten worked carefully, using his knife to cut through the rope while speaking in low, soothing tones. The wolf whimpered and growled, but did not snap at him, as if it somehow understood this pain was necessary for eventual relief. When the last strand parted and the cruel trap fell away, the animal let out a long, shuddering breath. The leg was badly damaged, probably beyond healing properly in the wild. Torsten knew the wolf's chances of survival were slim, even with the trap removed. But at least now it would have a chance, however small. "Can you stand?" Torsten asked softly, as if speaking to one of his children. The wolf tried, its 3 good legs scrambling for purchase, but the broken limb buckled immediately, and the animal collapsed with a yelp of pain. It lay there panting, sides heaving with exhaustion. Something moved in Torsten's heart, a feeling he could not quite name. Perhaps it was the memory of his own father, who had taught him that strength without compassion made a man no better than a beast. Or perhaps it was simply the look in those amber eyes, so full of intelligence and will to survive. "We're taking it back," Torsten announced. "What?" Leif's voice rose in disbelief. "Back to the village. Torsten, the others will think you've gone mad. We have children running about livestock. This is a predator. This is an injured creature that needs help. I'm taking it to the old storage shed at the far end of my property. It will be separate from the rest of the settlement." Before Leif could protest further, Torsten had removed his heavy cloak and spread it on the ground beside the wolf. Working carefully and murmuring constant reassurance, he managed to roll the animal onto the fabric. The wolf was heavier than he expected, easily matching his own weight, but Torsten was strong from years of farming and sailing. He fashioned a makeshift sled from the cloak and began dragging it back toward the village, with Leif following behind and muttering about foolishness and certain doom. The journey back seemed longer than the walk out. Several times, Torsten had to stop and rest, his muscles burning from the effort. The wolf lay still on the cloak, watching him with those unsettling amber eyes. There was something almost human in that gaze, Torsten thought. A recognition, perhaps, or a question. When they finally reached the outskirts of Hrafnvik, full darkness had fallen. Torsten deliberately avoided the main paths, not wanting to explain himself to curious neighbors just yet. He managed to get the wolf to the old shed without being seen by anyone except Leif, who had grown increasingly nervous as they neared inhabited areas. The shed was sturdy and dry, used mainly for storing tools and dried goods during summer. Torsten cleared a space in one corner and carefully transferred the wolf from the cloak to a bed of old straw and wool blankets. The animal watched every movement, but remained docile, as if saving its strength. "I'll bring food and water," Torsten said, "and I need to splint that leg properly." "You need to think about your family," Leif countered. "What will Ingrid say? What will the Jarl say when word spreads that you're harboring a wolf?" Torsten straightened, meeting his cousin's worried gaze. "I will deal with each challenge as it comes. This feels right, Leif. I cannot explain it better than that. Sometimes we must act on what our hearts tell us, not what our fears whisper." Leif sighed deeply. "Very well, I'll help you, though I still think this is madness. But we're family, and family stands together even in foolishness." A small smile crossed Torsten's face. "Thank you, cousin." They spent the next hour gathering supplies. Torsten brought strips of cured meat, which the wolf devoured hungrily, and a large bowl of water. Using straight branches and strips of leather, he fashioned a crude splint for the broken leg. The wolf endured the procedure with remarkable patience, though it whimpered several times when Torsten had to manipulate the damaged limb into proper alignment. "There!" Torsten said finally, securing the last knot. "That should help it heal, if the gods are willing." The wolf laid its head down on the straw, exhausted from the ordeal. Its eyes were already beginning to close. Torsten sat back against the shed wall, watching the creature breathe. "What story do you carry, friend?" he murmured. "What drove you to be caught by such a cruel trap?" Of course, the wolf offered no answer. But in the flickering light of the small oil lamp Leif had brought, Torsten thought he saw something in those amber eyes before they closed. Gratitude, perhaps, or simply relief that the pain had lessened. "I should get home," Torsten said quietly. "Ingrid will be wondering where I am." "What will you tell her?" Leif asked. "The truth. I've never lied to my wife, and I won't start now." As expected, Ingrid was less than pleased when Torsten explained what he had done. She stood in their longhouse, hands on hips, her blonde braids swinging as she shook her head in disbelief. "A wolf, Torsten? You brought a wolf to our property? What possessed you?" Their 3 children, Sven, age 8, Astrid, age 6, and little Frida, age 4, watched the exchange with wide eyes from their sleeping pallets. "It was injured and suffering," Torsten explained calmly. "I could not leave it to die slowly in such pain." So you risk our children instead?" Ingrid's voice was sharp with worry. "What if it escapes? What if it attacks them?" "It won't. The creature is too weak to pose any danger, and the shed is secure. I will check on it daily until it heals enough to return to the wild." Ingrid studied her husband's face for a long moment. After 12 years of marriage, she knew that expression, quiet determination mixed with stubborn compassion. It was one of the things she loved about him, even when it frustrated her beyond measure. "You promise me," she said finally, her voice softer now, "that you will keep them safe, all of them. If there is even the slightest danger." "I promise," Torsten assured her. "On my honor and my love for you and our children, I will not let harm come to this family." Young Sven spoke up from his pallet. "Father, can we see the wolf?" "Absolutely not," both parents said in unison. Torsten crossed to his son and ruffled his dark hair. "The wolf needs rest and quiet to heal. Perhaps when it is stronger you may look at it from a safe distance. But for now, you must promise to stay away from the old shed." All 3 children nodded solemnly, though their eyes shone with excitement at the thought of a real wolf on their property. That night, as Torsten lay beside Ingrid in their bed, he found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to the injured animal in the shed. He had set this course, and now he would see it through, whatever the consequences. The days that followed established a routine. Each morning before dawn, Torsten would visit the shed with food and fresh water. The wolf, he had begun thinking of it as gråpels, grey fur in the old tongue, grew stronger with each passing day. The animal ate heartily and drank deeply, and gradually the dull pain in its eyes began to clear. Torsten would sit with Gråpels for an hour or so each visit, speaking quietly while he changed the splint bandages and checked for signs of infection. He told the wolf about his family, about life in Hrafnvik, about the ships that would return in spring from their trading voyages. The wolf would watch him with those intelligent amber eyes, head tilted slightly as if actually listening and understanding. By the end of the first week, Gråpels could stand on 3 legs for short periods. By the second week, the injured leg was beginning to bear a little weight, though the wolf still favored it heavily. The healing was progressing better than Torsten had dared hope. Word of the wolf had spread through the village, of course. Leif had mentioned it to his wife, who told her sister, and soon everyone in Hrafnvik knew that Torsten Eriksson was harboring a wild predator on his land. Reactions were mixed. Some, like old Gunnar the storyteller, thought it showed great compassion and honor. "The old gods smile on those who show mercy to all living things," Gunnar proclaimed at the village gathering house. Torsten follows in the footsteps of the ancient heroes who understood that courage and kindness are not opposites, but companions. Others, particularly Halvard the wealthy merchant, thought it was dangerous foolishness. "Mark my words," Halvard warned anyone who would listen, "that beast will turn on him. Wolves are not pets or friends. They are killers by nature. This will end in blood." Jarl Magnus, the settlement's leader, summoned Torsten to his hall on the 10th day. The Jarl was a grey-bearded man of 50 winters, known for his wisdom and fair judgment. "Tell me true, Torsten Eriksson," Magnus said as they sat across from each other. "Why do you do this? Why risk the anger of your neighbors and the safety of your family for a wild creature?" Torsten considered his answer carefully. "Because, my Jarl, I believe that how we treat the helpless, whether human or animal, says much about who we truly are. The wolf could not defend itself. It was suffering through no fault of its own. To walk past such suffering when I had the power to ease it felt wrong in my heart. Magnus nodded slowly. You speak like your father. He was a good man, always guided by his conscience. Very well, I will not order you to abandon this course, but I do require that you keep the animal secured until you are certain it poses no threat. Can you give me your oath on this? You have my oath, Jarl. Then I trust you to honor it. But know this, if anyone is hurt because of your wolf, the responsibility will fall on your shoulders alone. Torsten bowed his head. I understand and accept this burden. As he walked back to his homestead, under a sky heavy with the promise of snow, Torsten felt the weight of his decision settle upon him. He had made a commitment, and now he would see it through, whatever the outcome. That evening, as he sat in the shed with Gropels, he spoke his thoughts aloud. You're healing well, friend. Soon you'll be strong enough to return to your forest. But I confess, I will miss these quiet talks, even though you never answer. The wolf cocked its head and made a soft sound. Not quite a whine, not quite a growl, something between the two. Then, to Torsten's amazement, the animal rose carefully on all four legs and took 3 halting steps forward until its head was within reach. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, Torsten extended his hand. Gropels sniffed it once, twice, then, incredibly, pressed its head against Torsten's palm. Torsten felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. In that simple gesture, he felt a connection being forged, a bond between 2 very different creatures who had somehow found a moment of mutual trust. No beast forgets its friend, Torsten whispered, remembering words his father had once spoken. I hope that is true, Gropels. I hope you will remember this kindness. The wolf's amber eyes met his, and for just a moment Torsten could have sworn he saw understanding there, deep, profound, and utterly mysterious. 3 weeks after Torsten had found Gropels in the forest, the first true snow of winter arrived. Thick white flakes fell from a pewter sky, transforming Hrafnvik into a landscape of pristine beauty. Children played in the new snow while adults hurried to complete final preparations for the long, cold months ahead. Torsten stood in the doorway of the shed, watching as Gropels moved around the confined space with increasing confidence. The wolf's leg had healed remarkably well, though it would likely always carry a slight limp, but the animal could run, could hunt, could survive in the wild once more. The time had come to let Gropels go. Tomorrow, Torsten said quietly. Tomorrow I will open the door and give you back your freedom. You've grown strong again, friend. The forest calls you home. That night, Torsten barely slept. Part of him knew this was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. But another part had grown attached to the wolf, had come to look forward to their daily interactions. Ingrid noticed his restlessness and laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. You did a good thing, she said softly. You gave the creature a second chance at life. That is no small gift. I know, but I will miss him. Then remember him with joy, not sadness. Remember that you acted with compassion when you could have walked away. That matters, Torsten. That matters more than most people know. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Torsten walked to the shed, carrying one final meal for Gropels, fresh fish from yesterday's catch. The wolf greeted him, as it had each morning for the past 3 weeks, with a soft rumble and an intelligent gaze. Today is the day, Torsten said, setting down the food. Today I give you back to the wild. He sat and watched as Gropels ate, memorizing every detail, the way the wolf's ear flicked at small sounds, the pattern of grey and silver in its thick fur, the careful way it moved its injured leg. When the meal was finished, Torsten stood and walked to the shed door. Be well, friend, he said, his hand on the latch. May you run swift and hunt well. May the forest shelter you and your pack welcome you home. He opened the door wide, letting in a gust of cold air and snowflakes. Gropels looked at the opening, then back at Torsten, then at the opening again. For a long moment the wolf did not move. Then, with a grace that seemed impossible for a creature so recently injured, Gropels walked to the doorway. It paused there, looking back one final time at the human who had saved its life. Their eyes met, and Torsten felt that same profound connection he had experienced weeks before. "Go," Torsten said gently. "You are free." Gropels turned and bounded into the snow, moving with increasing speed until it reached the tree line. There it stopped and looked back once more. Then, with a sound that was half howl, half call, the wolf vanished into the forest. Torsten stood in the doorway long after the wolf had disappeared, feeling both joy and loss warring in his heart. He had done what was right. He had shown compassion when others might have shown cruelty. But now the shed felt empty, and the morning seemed somehow lonelier. "Farewell, Gropels," he whispered to the silent forest. "Remember me, as I will remember you." Little did Torsten know that his act of kindness had woven threads into the tapestry of fate, threads that would soon pull tight in ways he could never have imagined. Winter settled over Hrafnvik like a heavy blanket, bringing shorter days and longer nights. Life in the settlement fell into the familiar rhythms of the cold season, repairing tools by firelight, telling stories in the gathering hall, rationing supplies carefully to ensure no family went hungry before spring. Torsten threw himself into his work with renewed focus, trying not to think too often about the wolf he had released. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled outside his longhouse, he would wonder where Gropels was and whether the animal had found its way back to a pack. 2 months passed in this way. Then, on a grey afternoon in late winter, everything changed. Torsten had taken Sven with him to check the fishing nets they had set through holes in the ice of a nearby lake. It was a cold task, but necessary, and he wanted to teach his son the skills he would need as a man. They worked together companionably, pulling up frozen nets and resetting them with fresh bait. "Father," Sven said suddenly, pointing toward the forest, "look at the tree line." Torsten straightened, following his son's gesture. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then movement caught his eye, a dark shape moving through the shadows between the snow-laden pines. "Probably a deer," Torsten said, though something in his gut told him otherwise. They continued their work, but Torsten kept glancing toward the forest. The shape appeared again, closer this time, and now there was no mistaking it. A wolf was watching them from the edge of the trees. "Father!" Sven's voice held a tremor of fear. "Stay calm," Torsten instructed, though his own heart had begun to race. He reached slowly for the axe he had laid on the ice beside him. "Move toward me, slowly. No sudden movements." But even as Sven shuffled closer, Torsten's eyes narrowed. There was something familiar about this wolf, the grey and silver pattern of its fur, the way it held its weight slightly off one leg, and those eyes, those unmistakable amber eyes. "Gropels!" Torsten called out, hardly believing it could be true. The wolf's ears perked forward. It took several steps onto the ice, moving with the peculiar confidence of a creature that understood this frozen surface would hold its weight. "Father, what are you doing?" Sven whispered urgently. "It's the wolf," Torsten said, a smile beginning to spread across his face. "The one I helped. Gropels, I cannot believe you've come back." The wolf approached to within 10 paces, then stopped. It stared at Torsten with those intelligent eyes, and then did something that made Torsten's breath catch in his throat. Gropels bowed its head low and made a soft, plaintive sound. Not a howl, but something gentler, something that sounded almost like gratitude. "Can I touch it?" Sven asked, his fear replaced by wonder. "Very slowly," Torsten instructed. "Let the wolf come to us." Gropels approached cautiously until it stood directly before them. Torsten extended his hand, and the wolf pressed its head against his palm, just as it had done in the shed all those weeks ago. Then, to Sven's amazement, the wolf did the same to him, allowing the boy to run his fingers through its thick winter fur. "It remembers you, father," Sven breathed. "It really remembers. No beast forgets its friend," Torsten quoted again, feeling that mysterious connection re-establish itself. "Welcome back, old friend. Welcome back." They stood together on the frozen lake for several more minutes. Man, boy and wolf, in a moment of perfect communion. Then Gråpale stepped back, turned, and loped back toward the tree line. Before disappearing into the forest, it looked back once and barked, a short, sharp sound that echoed across the ice. "What was that?" Sven asked. "A promise, perhaps," Torsten said thoughtfully. "Or a farewell. With wolves, who can say?" That evening, the entire family listened as Sven breathlessly recounted the encounter. Even Ingrid had to admit it was remarkable that a wild animal would approach humans in such a manner, let alone allow itself to be touched. "The wolf knows you saved its life," old Gunnar said when the story reached the gathering hall. "Animals have long memories for kindness and for cruelty. Your compassion has created a bond, Torsten. Mark my words. The wolf sees you as part of its pack now." Others were less enthusiastic. "It's unnatural," Halvard muttered. "Wild things should stay wild. No good will come of this mingling." But Torsten paid little attention to such grumbling. He had witnessed something rare and beautiful, proof that compassion could bridge even the gap between species. He went to sleep that night with a light heart, grateful for the unexpected reunion. He could not know that within a week that bond would be tested in ways he never imagined. The trouble began with a raiding party. A group of 30 men from a settlement 3 days' journey to the south had decided to test Hrafnvik's defenses, while most of the settlement's warriors were away on a winter trading expedition. These raiders were led by a man named Ivar the Ruthless, who had earned his name through years of brutal conquests. They came at dawn, when the mist still hung heavy over the land and most villagers were just beginning to stir. The first warning was the sound of screams from the southern edge of the settlement. Torsten jerked awake at the sound, his warrior instincts honed from years of training taking over immediately. He rolled from his bed, grabbed his sword and axe, and was out the door of the longhouse in seconds. "Stay inside," he shouted back to Ingrid. "Bar the door and keep the children quiet." The scene that greeted him was chaos. Raiders were pouring into Hrafnvik from multiple directions, overwhelming the handful of guards who had been on watch. Buildings were already burning, people were running in all directions, trying to reach safety or find weapons. Torsten sprinted toward the main square, where Jarl Magnus was attempting to organize a defense. About 20 men of fighting age had gathered, along with a few women who could handle weapons. Against 30 trained raiders, their chances were not good. "Form a shield wall," Magnus commanded. "Protect the gathering hall. Get the children and elderly inside." The defenders locked their shields together and braced for the assault. The raiders came at them in a disciplined rush, and the two forces collided with a crash of wood on wood and steel on steel. Torsten found himself fighting for his life, his sword deflecting blow after blow as the enemy tried to break through their line. For several desperate minutes the defenders held, but they were outnumbered and exhausted from years of relative peace, while the raiders were battle-hardened and fresh. Slowly, inexorably, the shield wall began to buckle. "Fall back to the hall," Magnus ordered. "Slow retreat, keep formation." They gave ground step by step, fighting all the way. Torsten found himself at the rear of the formation, protecting their retreat. He cut down one raider who got too close, then another, his arms burning with effort. Then disaster struck. A raider with a spear thrust low beneath the shields and caught Leif in the calf. Torsten's cousin went down with a cry of pain, and the line broke. "Leif!" Torsten shouted, breaking formation to drag his cousin back toward the hall. But this left a gap, and 3 raiders poured through it. Torsten found himself cut off from the others, alone, except for the wounded Leif. The 3 raiders surrounded him, weapons raised, death in their eyes. "This one's mine," growled the largest of the 3, a scarred man with a notched axe. "He killed my brother." Torsten raised his sword, knowing his chances were slim. He could perhaps take one of them with him, maybe 2 if the gods favored him, but all 3, while protecting an injured man. Impossible. The raiders advanced, spreading out to attack from multiple angles. Torsten backed up until he felt the wall of a storage building behind him. No more room to retreat. This was where he would make his stand. The scarred raider raised his axe for a killing blow. Then from somewhere in the smoke and chaos came a sound that froze everyone in place. A howl, long and fierce and full of fury. Not one howl, but many, a chorus of wild voices that seemed to come from all directions at once. "Wolves!" one of the raiders stammered, his courage suddenly faltering. Before anyone could react, grey shapes burst from between the burning buildings. Wolves, not one or two, but an entire pack of at least 15 animals. They moved with the coordinated precision of seasoned hunters, and at their head ran gropels, grey fur bristling, amber eyes blazing with protective fury. The pack hit the raiders like a force of nature. Gropels went straight for the scarred man who had been about to execute Torsten, leaping and catching him by the arm, bearing him to the ground. The other wolves fanned out, attacking any raider they could reach with terrifying efficiency. The raiders' discipline shattered immediately. These were men who had faced human enemies countless times, but wolves fighting alongside humans, it was beyond their experience, beyond their understanding. They broke and ran, those who could still move, fleeing back toward the forest from which they had emerged. The pack pursued them for several hundred yards, ensuring they would not regroup and return. Then, at some signal Torsten could not perceive, they broke off the chase and trotted back toward the settlement. Torsten stood frozen, still holding his sword, barely able to believe what he had just witnessed. The entire battle had lasted perhaps 5 minutes from the wolves' arrival to the raiders' flight. Around him, the other defenders were equally stunned, some pointing and murmuring in disbelief. Gropels approached Torsten slowly, blood on its muzzle from the fight, but otherwise unharmed. The wolf stopped directly in front of him, meeting his eyes with that same intelligent gaze Torsten had come to know so well. "You came back," Torsten said, his voice rough with emotion. "You brought your pack to save us." The wolf made that same soft rumbling sound it had made in the shed months ago. Then, one by one, the other members of the pack approached. Some larger than Gropels, some smaller, all watching the humans with wary but not hostile eyes. Jarl Magnus approached slowly, his sword still in hand but lowered. "Torsten Eriksson," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "What magic is this? How did you summon wolves to fight for us?" "I did not summon them, my Jarl," Torsten replied, never taking his eyes from Gropels. "I simply showed one creature kindness when it needed help. Apparently, no beast forgets its friend." The wolf pack remained in and around Hrafnvik for the rest of that day, as if standing guard against the raiders' possible return. They accepted food and water from the grateful villagers, but kept their distance from all, except Torsten, whom they allowed to move among them freely. By evening, when it became clear the raiders were not coming back, the pack began to drift away one by one into the forest. Gropels was the last to leave. The wolf approached Torsten a final time, pressed its head against his hand in what had become their ritual of connection, and then loped off into the gathering darkness. "Farewell, friend," Torsten called after the retreating shape. "May we meet again in better times." That night, as the settlement worked to put out the last of the fires and tend to their wounded, the story spread rapidly. Torsten Eriksson had saved a wolf's life, and the wolf had returned with its entire pack to save him and his people. It was the kind of tale that storytellers would carry far and wide, the kind that would be told and retold for generations. But for Torsten, it was simpler than that. It was proof that compassion, even toward the wildest of creatures, could create bonds that transcended the normal boundaries of the world. It was proof that kindness, however small it might seem at the time, could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. As he lay beside Ingrid that night, holding her close and listening to their children breathe softly in sleep, Torsten thought about the long chain of choices that had led to this moment, the decision to investigate a sound in the forest, the choice to help rather than walk away, the patience to nurse a wounded animal back to health, and the wisdom to set it free when the time came. Any one of those choices made differently, and today, would have ended very differently, probably with his death and the deaths of many he loved. "What are you thinking?" Ingrid murmured sleepily. "That the threads of fate are woven in patterns we cannot see until they are complete," Torsten replied, "and that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can save the world." In the forest beyond Hrafnvik, Gropels settled down among its pack, the beta wolf now elevated to alpha through its actions that day. The pack would thrive under its leadership for many years to come, and in time stories would be told among the wolves themselves, stories of a human who had shown kindness and of the debt that had been repaid. Because in the end, whether human or animal, all living things understand one simple truth: no beast and no person ever forgets a friend. Years passed in Hrafnvik. The settlement grew and prospered, its reputation spreading far beyond the Norwegian coastline. Tales were told of the village protected by wolves, of the man who had earned their loyalty through a single act of compassion. Torsten Eriksson grew older, his children grew into adults, and eventually grandchildren played in the same fields where he had once worked. But throughout all those years, there remained a connection between the settlement and the wolves of the forest. Sometimes, on winter nights when the moon was full, villagers would report seeing wolf tracks in the snow around the edges of their homes, not threatening, simply present, like guardians keeping watch. And sometimes, just sometimes, those with sharp eyes would catch a glimpse of grey fur moving through the trees, amber eyes reflecting the firelight from distant hearths. Gropels lived to be old for a wolf, leading its pack with wisdom earned through survival and struggle. When it finally passed in its 12th winter, it was said that every wolf in the region howled at once, their voices carrying for miles in a mournful chorus. Torsten heard that sound from his bed, where age had finally confined him. He was 72 winters old, grey-haired, and stooped, but still clear-minded. When the howling reached his ears, tears ran down his weathered cheeks. "Farewell, old friend," he whispered into the darkness. "We will meet again in the halls beyond, where all debts are settled and all friendships remembered." He died peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his family. And though it may have been the imagination of those present, several swore that as Torsten drew his last breath, they heard a wolf howl. Just once, long and mournful and full of respect, from somewhere in the forest beyond. The story of Torsten and Gropels became legend in Norway and beyond. It was carved into stone, woven into tapestries and sung by poets. But more than that, it became a lesson passed from parent to child, generation after generation. Show compassion to all living things, for you never know when that kindness might be returned. Treat even the wildest creatures with respect and mercy, for every life has value. And remember always that no beast, no person, no soul of any kind ever forgets a friend. In the centuries that followed, travelers to the region where Hrafnvik once stood would sometimes report unusual encounters with wolves, animals that showed no fear but also no aggression, that watched humans with intelligent eyes and seemed almost to communicate through gestures and sounds. Whether these were descendants of Gropels's pack, keeping an ancient promise, or simply wild creatures behaving as nature intended, no one could say for certain. But the people of that land never forgot the lesson of Torsten Eriksson. That courage without compassion is mere brutality, but compassion backed by courage can change the world. And so the story endures, a reminder from the age of Vikings that the strongest bonds are not forged in battle or sealed with gold, but created through simple acts of kindness offered freely and remembered forever. Thank you for watching this emotional journey through Viking history. If this story touched your heart, please share it with friends and family who would appreciate a tale of loyalty and compassion. Don't forget to check out our other Viking stories in the playlist below, and we'll see you in the next adventure.